Welcome to Beyond the Call podcast, where we tell the stories of those people behind the jobs we rely on. We go into the good, the bad and the ugly, and we shine a light in what can be a dark place. Just a warning, the content can be graphic and distressing, so please use your discretion. Please like and subscribe on your podcast platform and our social media. And if you have feedback, I read every single one. Let's get on to this episode of Beyond the Call. G'day everybody, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Call. We have another guest today, and it's my delight to welcome Crystal Culp, who is joining us from Alberta in Canada. Crystal, welcome.
Thank you, Peter. I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. So let's start from the beginning. Tell us about yourself. Where did you grow up, and what do you do?
Well, I grew up in Southern Ontario. Went to school there. All my family's in the area between Fort Erie, which is on the border with Buffalo, New York, all the way up through to just outside of Hamilton, Ontario. So I got family in all of that area. As I said, I went to school in that area. We moved around quite a bit when I was younger, but kind of settled in what is Ridgeway. And my parents are still living there. And I kind of started moving around, and it started with me going to college in Sudbury, Ontario, which is Northern Ontario, and went for a 3-year nursing course. And I've been a nurse for 38 years. Just retired last year.
Did you always want to be a nurse?
Yeah, no, that's a funny thing. When I graduated high school, I had no idea. I didn't put any thought into where I wanted to go, what kind of career I wanted. It just wasn't a thought that I ever had right through high school. And then grade 12 happens and it's boom. Oh, what are you going to do? And so I had a meeting with my guidance counselor. And he asked me a bunch of questions and I answered them. And he said, well, why don't you try nursing? And I thought, oh, that sounds pretty good. So I put my applications in to all the colleges around, and didn't make it. It was a little bit too late the year that I graduated. So I had to wait another year before I could put in more applications, and I got accepted again, very last minute. It was getting near the end of the summer. I had to kind of rush everything through, and moved up into Sudbury, Ontario, which is probably about an 8-hour drive from where I was living. My first time away from home, got extremely homesick. After a few months, I was like on the phone with my mother, and I'm saying, oh my God, I miss everybody there. Oh, this course is so tough. I don't know if I can do it. I just want to come home. And she kind of talked me into, just hanging in there, keep going. She said, the homesickness will pass. And so I stuck it out, and it did pass. And, my second and third year,
Did you stay on campus, or did you stay off
No,
campus?
I had to stay off campus because by the time I got my acceptance, residence was all full, which probably would have helped with my homesickness. But I was off campus, and I was living with another family. So I had a room sort of in their basement, and they were upstairs, which was a little bit uncomfortable for me. Because I'd never been in that kind of situation before. And so, I made it through the 3 years. I graduated. I had fun. The second and third years were like so much fun. I was able to somehow balance between studying and having fun and enjoying, the college experience. And the reason why I chose college over university, because at that time they were split. They were different programs, nursing programs. And the reason why I went to college was because I wanted to get more practical experience. So more skills experience and more experience in a hospital environment. Whereas at that time, universities were mainly based in the classroom. and they got very, very little time
Okay.
in hospital experience. So
So you guys have colleges and universities. I don't, because over here we don't have colleges. We have TAFEs and universities. TAFEs are probably what we more call your vocational
okay,
ones. So you can do nursing, but you're coming out with what we called EENs, or enrolled nursing, not registered nursing. And then to get your bachelor's, you need to go to a university.
right. Right. Well, they have changed that in Canada. They changed it quite a few years ago now, where they sort of bridged the colleges and the universities together. And so when you go for your degree now, you do get that practical skill building within the university degree. Um, but I came out, I graduated, I got a full-time job. I think I was probably practicing nursing 2, 3 years before I got a full-time job. I had temporary full-time.
When you were going through the college and that, what were you leaning towards as far as nursing is concerned? What sort of area?
I really wasn't leaning towards any area. I got a lot of experience in college in many different areas. And Sudbury at the time, and still to this day, they have a huge cardiac center. So I did some of my preceptorship in that cardiac center. So I was able to experience, um, looking after cardiac patients on the ward, as well as going into the angio cath lab and experiencing that, as well as I got to do emergency room in my preceptorship, and I believe medical surgical. So when I came out, I really didn't know exactly what area I wanted to work in. I was just looking for a full-time job. And, being casual at first was just like call in. So I would go in wherever they needed me. So I was able to experience a number of different units in different hospitals. Um, and then I got a full time job in my town. Was a small hospital, but it was in my town. It was close. Didn't have to drive very far. And I knew a lot of the nurses that had worked there because, again, it's a small town. So I did get a full-time job. It was a very interesting, it scared me at first because it had a very interesting mix on the unit. One side of the hallway was cardiac care. So we had 4 beds in a little small unit of cardiac care that were monitored beds. And then the rest of the floor was pre-surgical and post-surgical. The other side of the hallway was our antenatal, postpartum, labor and delivery, and nursery. So 2 very, very busy areas. And then having to work. And so every 2 weeks we would switch. One would work the coronary side and the surgical side. The other would work labor and delivery. And I had a
You're right.
6-week orientation with a very, very knowledgeable nurse. She was absolutely fantastic. I've had some fantastic mentors throughout my nursing career, which I really was grateful for because they taught me a lot. So she, taught me everything she knew or what she could teach me in 6 weeks of an orientation. And she was my partner after my orientation. So I knew that I could go and ask her any questions if I had any doubts about anything, which was really made me feel so much more comfortable working with 2 specialties on one unit. And
So do you have midwives over there?
we do have midwives, but they practice in hospital. Yeah.
Okay.
So they do practice in hospital. They will visit their clients in their homes, but when the client is ready to give birth, they then bring them into hospital. A lot of the time.
So to work on the postnatal on the postnatal and delivery, you don't have to be a midwife.
No, not at that time. not at that time.
Right.
Um, yeah. And so my very first, I'll never forget this. My very first shift after my orientation, where I was kind of on my own and, the master of my side of the hallway kind of thing. And I had just happened to be on labor and delivery, and it was a night shift. And I come in and somebody's in labor. Actually, there were two in labor. So we had two labor rooms and they were both full. So I go to the back, I get report, and I'm thinking, oh my God, how am I going to manage this? Right. And I just thought, okay, well, just kind of go with it and, get the cues from your patient, right? And, it's a
Yep.
natural process, right? So, just kind of let things happen and just monitor your patient and, everything should be okay. So get the first delivery done. Phew. I thought, okay, good. I only have one left. And then, so we get the one room cleaned up after, because we had to do all the cleanup as well, and then prepare the bed
Yep.
for the next patient, if there was a next patient, right? So we did all of
And if
that.
people have never been into a delivery ward, it's a messy place.
Yes. Yes, very, very messy. So we did that, got the room all cleaned up, and almost immediately after we got that room cleaned up, here they're bringing in another one in labor. And she had been laboring out on the ward. So the nurses, because we had on nights, there was a nurse that worked 3 to 11. There was an RPN that worked 12-hour nights with us and my other partner. So there were three of them out on the ward, um, looking after the labor and delivery patient as well as the other side of the hallway. So they bring her in and I'm thinking, oh my God, now I got another one. And so the other one that I had from the beginning delivered, this kept on all night for my whole 12-hour shift. It was one after the other after the other. And I thought, oh my God, when is it going to stop? And and some of them, the doctor never made it. So it was me delivering with the RPN helping
Yep.
me. And that was that was really, really stressful because again, I was a nurse. I'd only been nursing for 2, 3 years at the most and had never had a delivery. I did labor and delivery during my college, but I never delivered a baby before on my own. Um, so it was so stressful, but fulfilling. I was kind of proud that I got through it. Nothing, major happened. um, but
Yep.
it was quite stressful. Being, my first shift after my orientation and just wanting to be able to be there for my patient and just try to be calm because inside I was anxious. She was really super anxious.
Oh
And
yeah.
I'm trying to calm my patients down and, try to outwardly reflect, like being calm and that I'm in control kind of thing. Meanwhile, inside I'm like freaking out. Um,
Yeah.
so
The old duck underwater analogy.
exactly. And, the next morning when the day shift comes in, they couldn't believe how many babies I delivered. That nursery was full after my 12-hour shift the next morning.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and it doesn't matter how much training you do, watching videos and all that sort of jazz, until you actually do one. There's nothing that compares. There's nothing that can truly prepare you. And I was fortunate that any baby I delivered was healthy and well. They were smooth deliveries, but nothing can prepare you for when it goes wrong, and you've always got that in the back of your mind. Because a part of your training is for when it goes wrong. So therefore, that's what you concentrate on.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Right. And, you know, unfortunately, I worked on that unit for 13 years. So my first 13 years as a nurse was on that unit. And I learned so much. So much. I went and actually did a 10-week course at a local college, because I didn't really have in-depth training to read monitors and arrhythmias and that kind of thing. And I thought, oh, if I'm going to have to read these monitors, I need to know what to do. So I went and did a 10-week course, which was really, really super helpful in, just diagnosing and watching for arrhythmias and then trying to identify which arrhythmia it was, because the doctor's going to ask you when you call them, right? Um, and so I learned a lot, but as I said, it was a very, very fast paced environment because uh, it was a small hospital. So the nurses did everything. We didn't have any RTs, respiratory techs. We didn't have any of those. We, the nurses, did our ventilators. So that was something I had to learn.
Yep.
We did our own, uh, pacing. We did everything, right? Everything technical, it was us. So if somebody
Yep.
was on, a ventilator and the alarm went off, we had to figure out what was wrong and, problem solve that, kind of thing. So that's what I mean. It was very high, very, very fast paced, but I learned a ton. It was very stressful environment. We did have a lot of cardiac arrests on the unit. Over the years, we used to change partners every 2 years. And I remember I had this one partner, and I swear every morning, and it was night shift, every morning we would make our rounds to wake people up, do their vitals, check on them, and, for a report in the morning for the day shift. And just as we're getting ready to, either it was just before we started those rounds or just after we started those rounds, we would have somebody that we had to resuscitate. I don't know how many times when I was working with her over the 2 years that happened. It was like, oh my. So, you go through a lot of unexpected events when you're in, the medical field. So nursing, paramedics, doctors aren't there all the time, but those unexpected events, and they happen when you are very not expecting them. So like I said, you're wrapping up your 12-hour night shift, right? Everything's perfect. Everybody's vital signs are fine. And then boom, something happens, right? And somebody's yelling for
Absolutely.
help, or the alarm's going off, or something like that's happening, and immediately, this is where, if you have a system, and which is why ACLS is so good, because it's systematic, right? You can just automatically go into and think about the system and not think about what's happening around you, because you'll never get through it if you do.
Yep.
And then you can,
Yep.
and then when everything's done and over with and calmed down, that's when you kind of take a breath and then realize, oh my
Yep.
gosh, what did happen? And, you know,
Yep.
we're not
Do
really
you
good
do
at
you
doing
remember your
debrief.
first CPR? Do you remember your first arrest? The first time you did CPR?
Yeah. Yes, I do remember that. That was on the unit that I was just talking about. And it happened near the end of my shift. So my husband and my son were actually waiting for me because they came to pick me up. So they were actually waiting for me just outside the unit doors. And the arrest happened, and somebody came and closed the doors right on them. And my husband thought, oh, something's happening, right? And so yeah, they waited quite a while. But I remember that first arrest, and I kind of was like, at first you want to just freeze, right? But then you can't. So you just go and do what comes naturally, right? And just remembering your training, really, right? Because
Yep.
nothing else matters. If the patient doesn't have a pulse and they're not breathing, nothing else matters. You need to get a pulse and you need to breathe for them if they're not breathing. So that's kind of what I always put in my head and think about. Don't think about anything else. Everything else can, going on. But if the patient doesn't have a pulse and they're not breathing, we got to fix that first. And it makes it a little bit.
Do you remember if family were present at the time?
No, it was early. It was in the evening. I think it was around supper time. So at that time, family really didn't stay around for meals or like supper.
Yeah. Because there's a huge difference when you're doing CPR in front of a family member versus not. Huge.
Oh, yes, yes. Now in 2009, I went north. And so I've spent the rest of my career from 2009 until 24 in remote communities, and primarily Indigenous communities. And that's where I experienced doing an arrest in front of family, in front of a like extended family, like huge families,
Yeah.
right? And then you need somebody there kind of with that family, sort of explaining to them what's going on because they have no idea what's happening or what you're doing or anything like that, right? So you do need somebody with
Yeah.
them.
And CPR is extremely violent. It's extremely violent, both to do and to witness.
Yeah. 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 Especially if you don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really important to have, even if the family's not in the room, you still should have a delegate person that's communicating with them, going back and forth between them. Because they want to know, right? They want to know what's happening. And, if you don't keep them informed along the way and you just come out and say, oh, sorry, um, you know, they didn't make it. We couldn't bring them back. It's like so much more shocking for them and so much more traumatizing for them. And I know that, a lot of nurses experience an arrest is traumatizing, no matter what it is. A trauma coming in is traumatizing, no matter what kind of trauma it is traumatizing. But a lot of nurses don't really, and I don't know if this is the same for paramedics, but I know a lot of nurses bottle that up. Um, and they don't really get in touch with their emotions or even acknowledge them. Like, because I know in the hospital, you're expected to go right back to work, right? Okay, everything's done, back
Yep.
to work, right? You don't even have time when you're
Yeah.
at work. You don't even have time to think about what just happened, especially if you're working in the emergency department, right? It's just go, 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 go. Which I happen to get stuck in in working emergency a lot. Uh, and hospitals and managers are not good at offering debriefs or organizing a debrief, where nurses can talk about what happened, what went well, what didn't go so well, their feelings about it. There's just, and when there is a debrief that has been offered, and I used to do it when I was a nursing leader, I would organize debriefs a couple of days later and get everybody together that was involved. And I mean, even the clerks, you know, even the clerks at the front, because they see that patient coming in, right? And when you're
Yep.
in a remote community, they're small communities. Everybody knows everybody, right? So they know that person that came in and they're wondering, oh, what happened? And if the person doesn't make it or, dies, then that's a huge, traumatizing event for your housekeeping staff, your clerks, So I used to try to get everyone together that was working and that was a part of that event that happened. And just try to get everybody talking about what they thought about that and their feelings around that, rather than just expecting them to forget about it and move on. Because
Yeah.
you need some kind of
Yeah. My,
closure.
my leadership style was always a hot brief immediately. And then you do a full debrief in a couple of days when you've had time to process, come up with some thoughts, They may be good, they may be bad, and that's okay. Thoughts are thoughts, but you need time, but you also need that hot debrief. You need okay, let's just breathe, take 2 minutes, 10 minutes, and it depended on the job to how long that needed. Sometimes you would just, the one thing I found that with, in our situation, that is if you took in a big job into hospital, every other crew that was at hospital would take care of your vehicle and just leave you alone. And then you could just hand over the patient, be part of that, because sometimes you wanted to stay there and be part of that resus, or at least witness it and see what the go is, especially if you've got some sort of emotional investment with it. Not all jobs you get emotionally invested in, but some you do. But as you did say, they're all micro traumas. They're all little traumas that chip away at you, but even if you don't know it at the time, they all leave a little nick. But that hot debrief is so important. And one of the biggest issues I had was I used to work solo officer for nearly 17 years. It's hard to do a hot debrief with
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. And unfortunately, in nursing, you just don't have time. You don't have time. One, when you're in the remote north, there's not enough nurses to say, okay,
Yeah.
because you're it, right? And if it happens during the night, right, there's usually two nurses, one first call, one second call, and that basically is it. And unless you call the rest
Yeah.
of, the staff in. But then in Nunavut, we didn't have any paramedics either. So it was just the nurses, right? And patients were being brought in by family, by police, by whoever came across them, right? Um, and so that's one of the downsides in nursing is that, you know, leaders don't get it. They just don't get it because nurses just automatically, they just keep going, right? And nursing leaders think, oh, outwardly they look fine. So, oh, we don't need to provide anything for them type of thing, right? But this is where it comes into, you know, COVID. So when COVID happened, and there was a problem with our health system in Canada way before COVID, and the government knew it.
Yeah.
We're having a hard time getting nurses coming out of college, universities, having a hard time retaining nurses and recruiting nurses, right? And we knew there were gaps from the time I graduated, it was happening. And that was in 1987. Happened throughout my 38-year career. COVID happened and they kept pushing the nurses, not giving them rest, not, being emotionally available for them, not, checking in with them, just go, 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 work, 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 right? Calling them in on overtime and and blackmailing them, emotional blackmail, because they come in, they call them and they say, oh, and if you said no, they'd say, oh, well, we really need you, we don't have anyone and we have no one to look after these patients. And, that's emotional blackmail for a nurse, right? Because that we care about, what's happening
Yeah.
at work kind of thing. And especially when you get that phone call, it makes it so hard to keep saying no. But then there was a mass exodus after COVID. After the first wave of COVID, there was an exodus. But after, I think it was like the fourth wave or whatever, that's when there was a critical shortage because they just went in droves because they were burnt out. They were physically and emotionally exhausted and they felt no one cared,
Yep.
and now this is where we are. Right. And
Yep.
the government never, ever realized just how important nurses were to the system, in the system. Right. And to me, they really are the backbone of the hospital structure. Hospitals can't function
100%.
without nurses. They just can't.
Absolutely. Yep. And people that have listened to this, to my podcast before will have heard me say, I've had some experts on and they were revealing that organizational trauma is 12 times more likely to cause PTSD than occupational
Yeah.
trauma. So the support or the lack of support you're given is far more damaging than the trauma we see within our workplaces.
Oh, yes. And I have experienced that. So this was one of the reasons I retired early. I absolutely nursing was my purpose in life. It was, I said, I've always said it's my calling, right? I absolutely loved it. Even though it was tough and, bad things happened, organizations didn't, value me or what have you. I still did it because I loved the connection with the patients that I built. And I just loved it and I still have a passion for it. Um, my last organization that I worked for was in Nunavut, and it was for the government. And I was a senior. I was a senior leader for the region, and within that office, we hired another director that came in. So middle management kind of thing, and she had been like a supervisor, manager. uh, Type. And so this was like a kind of a step up for her, becoming a director type of thing. And I gave her some feedback and and I tried to stay as positive as possible. And I gave her some feedback she didn't really appreciate, but didn't tell me. Right. And I even asked
Mm.
her, she didn't tell me. And it just seemed to kind of spiral. And she started being very, very passive aggressive and bullying and harassing and talking to everybody in the office except me about me. And, the way I was as a manager and, all of these kinds of things. I did try for a year. I tried to mediate with her and I went to her and I said, hey, you know, look at if I've been saying things to you, I don't know that I've said in a way that you're taking it as, something negative. Please let me know because I don't know what, I'm doing. And I'm hearing that, you're not pleased with me for whatever reason. I don't value you. I'm undermining you. So let me know and I'll fix it. Right. Every time I went to her, I think I did 2 or 3 times, had to sit down with her and just had a talk and said, "I'm open to anything you wanna say to me. We need to kind of resolve. There's tension here, and I don't know where it's coming from,
Mm.
but we need to resolve it because we're working in the same office." And she just refused. She said, "No, I'm fine. I'm good. All is well," kind of thing, and it just got to be so stressful and such a toxic work environment that it started affecting my physical health, not only my mental health, but my physical health. And so
Yep.
I finally had a conversation with my manager and kind of told her what had been going on for the last year. And mediation got involved. It didn't work. Nothing was going to work. I actually put in a formal complaint to HR that was written, and they dismissed it because I was
Mm.
in mediation. And, they said it didn't meet the criteria, their criteria for harassment or bullying. And besides you're in mediation. I said, well, mediation is not working and this is not going to be resolved. So finally, I tried one last thing before I resigned and retired, and I went down. So I went from being a senior leader, took a lower position as a supervisor to get out of that office, right? So I went and became I took a position as supervisor of health programs in the community that I was always working in and lived in. So I was part of that community and everybody was excited to have me there, right? And I got out of the office and I thought, okay, well, maybe things will, calm down. I'll be out of there, be away from the tension and the stress. she brought it with her because she started then coming over into the health center unannounced and walking around into the back offices and my office when she didn't really need to be there at all because
Yeah. So this was more about ego now.
yes, and about power because now she was in a position above me, right? And
Yeah.
just letting me know that, oh, now she's in, now she's got something over me, type of thing. And I just I did that for a few months and then I thought, you know what? This isn't worth it because now it's souring. It's souring my experience as a nurse. And I don't want to retire on a negative tone or in a negative way. So I'm gonna go out on my terms and still have the love and the passion for nursing that I always had, or have.
Yeah.
And, I'm just advocating for nurses in a different way now, with my speaking business and going around and talking to nursing leaders on retention and how they can, retain their staff that they have rather than, recruiting and those recruits leaving if the environment isn't more positive and supportive.
Yeah. I think it's a generic health issue that just because you're a good nurse doesn't make you a good leader, and just because you're a good nurse doesn't make you a good manager. And those two are totally different roles, leadership and
Yeah.
management. Um, and yeah, you can have some amazing healthcare providers that are bloody terrible managers.
That is so true. That is so true. I mean, in 2013, so I had my first manager role in 2011. So I went north in 2009. I did probably about a year and a half. So early 2011, I was approached by my manager because they had her come out of retirement to kind of get everything stable in that health center. And when it was stable, she wanted to go back into retirement, but there was nobody applying for the position, right? So she came to me and she said, have you ever thought about applying for, the director of patient care? And I said, no. I said, no, never even occurred to me. I said, because I'd been always told in hospitals in Ontario, and in the cities, I didn't have enough experience. I needed my degree. So I went and got my degree. Then they said, oh, now you need your master's to be a manager, right? And I thought, oh, Christ, I'm not going to do that. Like, so when she asked me that question, I said, no, I never even thought about it. I've always been told I need, a master's degree to be a manager. And she said, well, I've noticed this, this, and this about you. You connect really well with your patients. Everybody comes out happy. After you've seen them, you're really good with your colleagues. You're have really good communication. She said, I think that you would be good in this position. Why don't you apply for it? And I said, oh, well, I'll think about it. And so I did give it some thought. And I thought, you know what? If no one else is applying for it, why not give it a go? And, you know, if I get it, I get it. If I don't, I don't, kind of thing. And,
What's the worst they can say?
yeah, exactly. And, I did get it. They asked me some finance questions on it, and I was like, "I have no idea," but I just went from budgeting my own finances in my household and put them onto paper, and I got it. They were willing to, educate me, um on the finance piece of it. And I worked really hard at that, getting that budgeting and finance from a health perspective. Um, and that was my first role as a manager. And in 2013, in the same organization, my second grandson was born and I was home for it. But I was only home for 4 weeks. So I was only home a couple of weeks after he was born. And I thought, geez, I missed so much of my first grandson's early days because I was in the north. And the first time I saw him and held him, he was 6 months old. And I didn't want that to happen with my second grandson. So I'd asked if I could, take some time off. When I go on vacation, if I could just take an extended vacation of unpaid leave, right? But just like an LOA kind of thing. And I would keep my same full-time position and just come back and, work as many hours as they wanted me to work to kind of make up for it. And their response was no, just a flat no, no reason or what have
Yeah.
you. And I thought, well, that's not very good because I'm dedicated. I do hard work and my work is good. And, I do overtime and I don't even get paid for it. Right. But I'm there, I'm supporting
Mm.
my staff. And I said to them, well, if the answer is no, then you're kind of going to force my hand for me to resign. And they said, well, oh, well, you need to do what you need to do, which made me feel like, okay, well, you're replaceable, right? We'll get somebody else to fill your
Yep.
position. And I thought, wow,
Absolutely.
wow. So they're not even seeing me as a human being away from my family and just wanting to spend more quality time with my family. I'm a body filling a position. That's all I was to them,
Yep.
right? And that,
You're an employee number.
yeah, exactly. And that's where I thought, wow, I want to be a leader that I want, that I would have wanted, right? I want to support my staff. I want to be emotionally available and emotionally supportive. I want them to have that work-life balance, right? And I want to listen to them. They have thoughts and ideas. They're the ones that are doing the work at the front line. If our policies don't reflect that, they're not going to follow policy, right? And they're the experts. We should be involving them in policies. And so many hospitals, so many organizations don't do that, that it's like, okay, if you don't listen to me, then it's not going to happen. Nurses are not going to follow your policies. And that's just the bottom line.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And I think that's the problem with it's a stick method, not a carrot method, in the vast majority of health systems, I believe. And also when you were saying about being invested, it's got to be genuine investment. It's got to be genuine care. You can tell when it's bullshit.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. And patients can
Ticking a
tell.
box.
Yeah. Patients can definitely tell because um, working in the north it's such a different environment, it's such a different culture up there, and it really opens your eyes to the different lifestyles in Canada. Like, I was just astounded when I first went up there and I thought, oh my god, this kind of lifestyle is happening in Canada. Like, oh my gosh, right?
Mm.
There's poverty, there's food insecurity, there's not enough you know, medical advice, and practitioners come in and out, in and out, in and out. They don't stay long enough to really get to know the patients and the community. And the patients get really bitter and distrustful of that, right? Because I've heard more than once when I was in the north, oh, these nurses, oh, they just come in and out, they're just making money. That's all they think about is making money. And I thought, oh, okay. So in all my travels, I talked to many, many nurses. I talked to many, many community members. And there's the same thread in all of them, right? There are many nurses that do go to the north, and that's all they want to do. They just want to make money. So they don't extend themselves out into the community. They don't take part in community events. They're just in the hospital. And so what I tried to do as a leader was say to them, get out, on your days off. Don't come into the health center. We don't need you in here. Go out, enjoy, go and walk around the community. There's, this event happening. Go to that. right? Just go and see what's
Yeah.
happening out in the community. Let people see that you're out in the community. Then they'll know you're here for something other than just making money. And a lot of them
Yeah.
didn't take my advice. Um, and then there were those ones that were casual, that wanted to come back to the same community, that did build bonds because they were repeat. Even though they left, they'd come back, right? And it was sort of a regular cycle. But there were a few nurses like myself who actually moved up there, lived in the communities, and became a part of the community, which is really what you should be doing, right? As a nurse. I mean, in the cities, and in the larger hospitals, it's so that's why I left. That's why I left the hospital, was because it was so clinical. You didn't have time to say hi to your patient, not let alone take their vital
Mm.
signs, right? And have a little bit of a conversation. You didn't get to know their families. You didn't get to know your patient.
No, it's a production line.
Exactly.
It's just a production line
And
of health.
and that's not the kind of nursing that I wanted to do. So I left. I did home care for a couple of years, before I went north, and I loved that because I could connect with the family, I could connect with the patient. I was in their homes. It was so rewarding for me. The only thing was that I was working more than a 12-hour shift because I was doing work at home, right? Because my office is at home when you're doing home care. So you're always doing something. Um, and I found out, like, after a couple of years, I'm like, oh, wow, I'm doing more work, right? I'm doing work right up until I'm on call, and then I'm on call, right? And it was,
Yep.
and you get a really large pay cut, for doing home care, uh, compared to the pay that you get when you're working in a hospital. Like, at the time, I think it was early 2000s, when I was in home care, like 2005, 2006 kind of thing. And it was like, it was a $10 an hour pay cut for me to move to home care. I did it because, again, money was not my goal. I did it because, one, I could be my own boss. I could make my own schedule. And nobody was hovering over me. I was out in my car. I was connecting with my patients, and I was connecting with our team. So our team always we had in-person meetings, I think probably about once a month. But we always called each other, and we
Hmm.
were always talking about, patient care. We did some team building things as well, but we were a close team, very, very close knit team. I think there was about four of us, on the team, and we were very, very close, and we all cared about the patients. So we really wanted to make sure that each of us did kind of the same thing, same care plan. We wanted to make sure that that patient had that continuity in their care.
Yep.
So we were kind of all on the same page, which was really, really important. But, again, it didn't take long. I think 3 years, and the agency started pushing me. I could comfortably see 12 patients in an 8-hour day. And that's leaving time to have a conversation, not to be in and out of the door, but to have a conversation with them, make sure they're good, make sure they're okay for the day, and let them know, remind them that they can always call if they have any questions or any issues. Um, but 12 patients in a day, if I started at 8 or 8:30, I'd probably be done between 3:30 and 4 o'clock, which was what I was hired for. I was hired for an 8-hour day. And then they started pushing and wanted me to see more patients and going into the evening. And I said, no, like, we start call,
Mm.
right? We start call at like 5, 6 o'clock. So I want to go home. I want to have a little bit of a break. I want to have supper. I don't want to be seeing patients and doing call at the same time. Right. And I said,
Yep.
that's not what I was hired for. I was hired for an 8-hour workday during the day. Um, and so it didn't take me long before I left that job. Because, again, feeling undervalued, you know, replaceable, and just having no voice, really, right? In
Yeah.
what you're doing and what service you're providing and the quality of care you're giving to patients, right? So,
Well, and I think the biggest issue is that when you're it's like just trying to squeeze juice out of an empty lemon. Like it's just, there's nothing left to give and you're still wanting more. And when those demands come in, it makes you feel inadequate, negative. It affects everything. And when you're not feeling that well, it affects home, it affects work, it affects everything.
yeah, exactly. And, so the culture in the workplace really it's a precipitating factor in burnout in healthcare providers. That is the
Yep.
precipitating factor. But, nurses and paramedics and who RPNs, are all blamed for their own burnout. Right. Like there's a problem with you
Yeah.
because you're burnt out.
Yeah.
Well, no, let's look at the workplace you're working in. One, you're experiencing trauma probably several times a day if you're working in high, stressful environments, high, fast-paced environments. You're probably experiencing trauma a few times a day, a few times during your shift, and most shifts are 12 hours shifts, right? And then you're going home, and a lot of them are mothers, and then you got to go home and you got to care for your kids, and all of it, and everything just builds up. And when you go into work, I remember going into the hospital, and I was working in emergency rooms in Hamilton, all 4 of their hospitals, because I was on their resource team, working in their hospital emergency departments. Didn't matter which hospital I went to. I'd walk in the morning and they'd have on the board the staff, and they'd highlight how many short we were, how many staff members, how many nurses we were short for that day. Like 4, 5, 6 nurses, I'd be like, oh my God, that means, okay, I'm doubling and tripling up rooms. I'm going to be running my ass off. And that's not a good way to start a day, right? And then you have your charge nurses barking at you, come on, keep up. You got to do this, you got to do that. And then if you're not off on time, they're barking at you because, they think you're going to put in overtime. Well, I'm not going to approve your overtime. Well, did I even ask you about overtime yet? You know what I mean? It just such a bad environment that just breeds negativity. And no wonder nurses become what they become. And they don't even realize it. You don't even realize it because it's such a cycle, right? And I only noticed it because I was losing the passion I had for nursing. I was becoming odd, like a robot. And I thought, wait a minute here, like what's going on with me? Right? Because I actually loved my job. I loved going into work. Right. And when I started to not have a hard time getting up and going into work and looking forward to it, that's when I knew, okay, something's wrong. I have to think about this, and I have to think about what is wrong here and how can I solve it for myself. Right. And it's just really, I looked at it and I thought, okay, I all by myself, I can't change the work environment, right? But what I can do myself is to stay positive. No matter how busy of a day it gets, I say to myself, you can only do what you can do. Just get in there and do your best and, help each other out, right? So I'd always check in with my partner because, you're always kind of partnered up, especially for breaks because you got to, hand off to each other for breaks and stuff like that. So I'd always connect with my partner at the beginning of the shift and check in with them, right? Hey, I've got a few minutes here. Do you need help with anything? Right. And they do the same with me, kind of thing. So that made the day a little bit better, knowing that if you get really busy and your partner, has a few minutes, they can come and help you and you are comfortable in asking them for help. Right. Um,
Yep.
it just makes things a little bit nicer in your little bubble where you're working. It doesn't help when you have to go outside of your bubble and talk to nurses that are nasty. But I really never let that bother me. Especially, it was so much easier working in the resource team because I knew some days I'm not coming back to this unit tomorrow. I'm going to be somewhere different tomorrow.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's a better.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're stuck,
What a lot of people outside of healthcare don't understand is that when you can have a day where you can do multiple traumas, like you said, and it can be back to back to back, and you can have other days that are just pretty damn cruisy. But you made a good point earlier, is that night you have to go home to your family and you have to pretend, not pretend, you want to be okay, but it's really hard, and that chips away at you. People have lots of empathy for soldiers and Marines, Defence Force in general, who deploy. They obviously get up to some pretty gnarly shit over there, and then they come home. So they get to do their traumatic type of things. They get to do whatever missions they got to do, but then they get to come back to base and they debrief with their team and they hang out with their team and they bounce it off their team. Whereas, and they kind of have to reintegrate when they come back home, but that could be 3 months, 6 months, obviously depending on who, when, where, what. First responders and health workers in the hospitals and that, it happens every day. You have to be able to turn it on and turn it off. And that it becomes where you don't know if you're turning it on or turning it off. And the only people that notice is your family, not you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you have young kids at home, which in the early days of my nursing career, my kids were they literally grew up with me being a nurse. Uh, and so you can't go home and you can't, be not okay in front of them, right? Because they don't understand, right? And so you have to hold that in until, they're in bed. And I still do this to this day. That's when because I used to carry stuff home with me, right? And I'd lay in bed and I'd think about my day and I just, it interrupted my sleep and it just drove me crazy. And so I thought, I need to think about my day, what went well, what could I improve, and just let it go at that, right? Instead of mulling it over and thinking, oh, I did such a terrible job and I did this wrong and I did that wrong. I let things go. I had to let things go. But I do like a reflective practice and I think about my day, the day before, and this has helped me with now I journal. So I've been journaling and writing things down, which is really helpful because that really gets your emotions out. And I do that reflective practice. And then I think, okay, it wasn't that bad. Okay, let it all go. And then I don't think about it anymore. And that's been really, really super helpful for me because I had the first senior management position that I had was really stressful. It was very, very stressful. I had a lot on my plate, more than I should have had on my plate. And I was so stressed out at work that I was snapping at people. And me coming from the emergency room environment, very direct, right? Because that's the way you have to be in emerge, right? You just tell people, do this, do that, and you're very direct.
Yeah, don't use 10 words if 2 will do.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what I was doing, right? Not even realizing that, for some people that was like, oh, some people just didn't get it, right? And my first performance evaluation I had with my manager at the time brought that to my attention, right? And I thought, oh my God, really? Like that's what people think about me? Oh my gosh. And that was a good thing. I took that as a positive because I changed it. I knew I had to change it. I didn't
Yep.
want to be that kind of manager, right? So I
Yep.
changed the way I thought about my day. I wrote down 3 priorities, 3 goals I wanted to achieve that day. And if I didn't get to the 3 goals, sometimes goals came up that I needed to do and put them as priority. And I just went with the flow. And that's where my attitude changed. And I opened up communication with my team. And, things got a lot better. So I'm so glad that, she told me about that because I would never have realized it otherwise. Um, that,
You don't know what you don't know.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's where, some nurses just don't appreciate constructive feedback or know how to take it. And not only that, but know what to do about it. And that's where they kind of put up this wall of, I know what I know, and people shouldn't be telling me to do anything because I know what I'm doing. You know how many times I've heard a nurse say,
Yep.
I've been a nurse for so many years, right? I know, I know it all, kind of. Well, nobody knows it all for one. And, being in the
100%.
medical field, you're constantly learning. You have to constantly learn to keep up just with the pace of the changes that are made, right? So, I mean,
Yep.
I'm glad that, a lot of my managers were really good mentors for me and they broached the hard subjects with me. And I really appreciated that, right? Like, I know I'm a direct person. And so I like people to be direct with me. Just put it out there. And I'm open and ready to receive whatever, you want to tell me because I know you're telling me to make me better or a better person.
Yep.
So,
Yep. And being open to feedback is something I think that as a culture, as a Western culture, we're shit at.
yeah,
We just don't like criticism. Uh, but the thing that's counterintuitive to that is we can't handle compliments to our face is even worse.
yes, that's true.
There's nothing more awkward than somebody telling you that you've done a really good job. If they criticize you, you can kind of, or give you feedback, you can kind of choose how to take it. When it's a compliment, you're like, oh, it's just awkward. We're just not. We don't do it as a society very much, and it's not something we're very good at.
Yeah.
Now, I
And
wanted to go back to something you mentioned with your journal. Um, I I can't. I didn't do it. I regret not doing it, and I would recommend to everybody to journal. And the reason I would say that from my experience is if you end up with an injury like PTSD, or you have a really bad outcome of a patient that affects you for a while, it doesn't necessarily have to go into PTSD, but it can be quite a negative experience for a while. Um, we Every good thing you've done as a professional goes out the
yeah,
window, and every negative thing you've done in your career is front and center in your brain, and you are the worst operator who's ever been. You're dangerous and you are shit. And you have this confirmation bias inside your head that just reiterates how bad you are. And it's not true at all, but you won't be able to think about good things until you get into a better place. A journal is you writing down positive shit you've done.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, you know, confirming in your head, right? That, okay, this is how my day went. This is what went well. This is what I could have done a little differently, right? And you need to be okay with that because we're all human. Nobody is perfect. We all make mistakes, right? Just own up to your mistakes and learn something. So turn your negativity into a positivity so that it doesn't happen again, right? And that's what I used to tell when I was
Yep.
mentoring student nurses and new nurses. That's what I would tell them. right? It's like, don't take your mistakes so much to heart because everybody makes a mistake, right? You try not to, but it's going to happen. I said, just learn from it. This is where I see you went wrong. Go home and think about it because I don't want you to make the same mistake down the road. You need to,
Yep.
this is a learning experience for you, right? So just
Yep.
unpack that mistake, learn something from it, and let's move on, kind of thing, right? Because, a lot of managers want to batter you over it, right? Oh, you made this mistake. Every day you go in, they're reminding you, you made this mistake, kind of thing. And you can't do that. We're all human beings. And you're not going to learn from just being negative all the time, right? You learn from turning it into a
100%.
positive so that you say, oh, okay, I learned something from that. Now I'm going to take that and move on. You might make a different mistake, but this is like where you're constantly learning. Um, and this is
Absolutely.
where, I say that, you know, nurses are not fully, well, not just nurses, but, paramedics, anybody in the medical field or in the healthcare field are really not appreciated. We work like dogs. Those nurses, when I was in the emergency room, we are treated like dogs. Run, 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 run. If you don't immediately, when somebody comes to relieve you for your break, if you don't drop everything immediately and go, you've lost your break, right? And they say, oh well, oh, you should have been ready to go. It's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
right? You just it's such a uh, toxic environment for a nurse that really wants to connect with people and their families and do some health teaching. That is not possible in this day and age. And it's even worse. I got out of the hospital, like I said, in 2009. And what I found in the remote communities was that work life balance. It was awesome. Awesome. I thought, whoo, I just can't, I'm in heaven here. This is great.
Couldn't agree with you more. Couldn't agree with you more. I worked 3 years in the CBD of a major city, and I loved it. Best place to learn. Do the yards, do the turnover, and then I went out what we call out bush, and it's just a different life, and it's like work smarter, not harder. You're still doing jobs, you're still making a difference, but you're not absolutely getting smashed, and your family, you're with your family more. So I used to work 4 days on, 4 days off. I would leave home this is when I was working in the city. I'd leave home at 6 o'clock in the morning. So often my kids would still be asleep. I'd get home at 8 o'clock at night. So the kids would be asleep. And then I'd be on night shifts. So the kids would be asleep or at school or wherever. And, so I'd go 4 or 5 days living in the same house without seeing my
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah. And that was the same for me, right? Because, I lived in Ridgeway, worked in Hamilton. That's a 1 hour drive one way. So that's 2 hours
Yep.
added on to my day, right? And if I didn't get out on time, that's another, extra to my day.
Yep.
And working a 12-hour shift, which is why I worked nights for so long when my kids were little, because I wanted to be home with them, right? Like during the day. So all those years, I think I spent probably about 10 years working straight nights when they were little because I'd get 4 hours of sleep, right? So my mom would come and take the little ones that weren't in school yet to her place for 4 hours. I'd get sleep. Then she'd bring them back around lunchtime or so. And I'd be up for the rest of the day until I went back to work. It was just, it was just impossible to have a family life. I miss so much of my,
Yep.
family life and my kids growing up. And when I went north, it was just like, because there's such small communities and you really don't have all of the, you know, uh, social life. So like malls and shopping and theater, cinemas and, all of that. You don't have that up there. You get to be really close to your colleagues, and you build
Yep.
those bonds with your colleagues, and not only with your colleagues, but with the people in the community. I still have friends from when I lived in the North, even though I'm back now
Yep.
in society, if you want to say that. Um, but I still, I still have those friends in the North that are still living in remote communities. And I loved the life up there. It was such a much better work balance. And um, I have to say, the manager that I had in Northern Ontario was absolutely awesome. I still connect with her every once in a while. Um, and she validated me. She heard me. She heard what I was saying, and she validated that, and she let me go, run with all of my ideas, which was fantastic. It was like my dream job. Um and
Yep.
then, restructuring happened, and the band and council kind of wanted things to be restructured, and terminated a lot of the senior staff. Um, so that devastated me. That was another traumatizing experience. I had never been terminated in a position before, and I was terminated without cause. So they gave me, a package and everything. But I was like, I'm devastated. I don't want to leave the community. Like, these are kind of like my family, right? And it was just like, what am I gonna do now? Type of thing. So that was a really traumatizing experience. Um, and I think I cried for like days over it. Uh, and one of my friends kind of said, she said, they, the staff and the band and council might have terminated you, but just remember that, you did a really good job. You did a lot of change, and you brought some really good things into the organization and the community. And I have to say that, everybody did tell me that they couldn't believe, one, that they terminated me, because I did a lot. Like, I'm an action person, so I like to take a project and I like to see it through and to have some outcome at the end, right? And so a lot of people appreciated that, from the community, and that made me feel a lot better in leaving, right? It just kind of
Yep.
shifted my mindset a little bit. Instead of, you know, for a couple of days there, I just kind of wallowed in my misery, um,
Yep.
kind of thing. But, I had some really good friends that just, made a few comments and made me think about it a little bit differently.
Yep. So I want to strip it back and go back to your sort of your heritage and your cultural roots and that sort of thing, and then talk about how you ended up out in the north and into these remote communities. So, what is your cultural background?
I am Indigenous, so I'm Six Nations, in just outside of Hamilton. So they call it. Uh, it's right on the Grand River. So it's a community. It's a large community. It's one of the largest communities in Ontario, Indigenous communities, and it has six tribes all together living in one area. And it's also the only reservation that has that kind of mix of six different tribes working and living together peacefully. Um,
Okay. So yeah, I know absolutely nothing about the Indigenous history of Canada. So if I ask questions, it's because I don't know, and if I figure if I don't know, there's probably other people that don't know as well. So
yeah.
yeah, it's what is the Indigenous history of Canada in a nutshell, as a summary?
Okay. So So it all started with John A. Macdonald, the first premier of Canada. Um, so when the settlers started coming and settling in different parts of Canada, um, they they wanted the land, right? And the Indigenous people were ready and willing to share, right? However, the settlers didn't want to share. And so John A. Macdonald kind of put out this bill or proclamation that, the Indigenous, or the Indians, as they were called back then, were kind of pushed onto a piece of land, which they are now called reservations. And at that
Yep.
time, they couldn't come off. And if they came off the reservation, they had to have a piece of paper saying that they were granted by the government to leave the reservation for a specific reason. And over the hundreds of years, that has evolved a bit, so Indigenous people now can come off and on reservation. However, in reservations, you know, in these treaties, so every um,
Keep going. My camera's dropped out, but
so
just keep going.
so every reservation has a treaty with the government. And basically, what these treaties say is that the government is promising to look after them, give them food, shelter, clothing, all of the basic necessities of life, kind of thing, while they're on this parcel of land. However, the government did not abide by their promises. And
Yep.
so what happened was the Indians started having no food, um, no shelter. They were starving. And then war kind of broke out. And as the hundreds of years gone by, John A. Macdonald then thought, oh, well, let's, put these people in their place and let's assimilate them into society.
Yep.
And so that's where he set up residential schools for the children. So children were then taken from their families and sent to a residential school where they were traumatized in many different ways. And this happened all over Canada. And so the last residential school closed, and I believe it was in the late 90s, from the 1800s into the late 20th century.
Yeah.
And it just bred, intergenerational trauma. So, all of the children of people that went to residential school are still being traumatized through their parents. And now I, even read that it changes your physical DNA after, being transferred so long through generations upon generations upon generations. And so now, the Indigenous communities are kind of standing up and wanting to take more ownership of their communities, because the government is not supplying clean water. The government isn't supplying, sewers or indoor plumbing. I mean, I remember going and visiting my aunt and uncle on the reservation because I wasn't, my grandparents moved off the reservation before they started having children. So my mother and my aunts and uncles did not grow up on the reservation. We weren't even attached to any kind of cultural traditions or values or anything like that because my grandfather wanted his family to be assimilated. And my mother grew up being told, don't tell anybody that you're Indian, right? Because then they'll be targeted. And they were afraid that their kids would be sent to residential school. right? And that went right up. And my mother has cousins that went to residential school in the 1960s. So it was still happening into what I would call, fairly modern day. And so they were kind of in hiding, but out in plain sight, right? And so they didn't practice any of their cultural traditions or beliefs. But they did go and see my aunt and uncle, who still lived on the reservation. We still had family there. So we would go every Sunday, take the drive out there and go and visit. And I remember they still had outhouses. They had no running water in their houses. Um, they didn't have refrigerators. They had no electricity. And so it was a very different going from what I knew and grew up in and going back. And it was really like pioneer days, really.
Was it a choice that they didn't have those things as a culture? Was it a choice that they didn't have electricity and that type of thing?
No, it was the fact that they had to pay. So because the government didn't have governance over that piece of land there,
Yep.
the community had to pay to bring sewers in. So everything was money, right? Money paid to the government to have these services brought in. Now they do. And they have had for quite a while. But just, I started going to the reservation probably in the 70s. Into the 80s. So probably late 80s, early 90s is when they started getting electricity and sewers and that kind of thing. But yeah, the government said, hands off. We're not responsible for this. You've got to pay. If you want these services, you've got to pay, kind of thing. And it's still like that in the remote north. Yes, they do have electricity, but it's still clean. Drinking water is not safe. Food insecurity, because food has to be flown in to remote communities. It's a higher price. A lot of people can't afford it to buy it in the store. Their growing seasons are so short that they really can't grow their own food. So there's some major, basic necessities of life not being met, which really impacts your health, right? So like crowded, there's not enough housing. You've got 20, 30, sometimes 30 people in a small 2-bedroom house, and if somebody gets sick, then they all get sick, right? And that's how TB is still active in Nunavut, in Canada. There are still TB cases. Actually, there was an outbreak in Nunavut when I was there. And it was, in my opinion, it was mishandled. Very, very mismanaged. And I think it is all to do with, we still have that sort of racism in Canada. It's like, people in the remote communities, they're sort of like second-class citizens. There's no health equity between Canada, between the remote north and what is happening in cities. There's no health equity. People in the remote north, like Nunavut, northwestern Ontario, Manitoba, northern Alberta, they don't have a choice, right? They don't have a choice. This is where you're being sent. That's it. You either go or you don't go. Right? It's not like I get to pick a doctor, I get to pick a specialist. No, there's none of that talk. It's just, this is where you're going, and you either like it or you don't. And that's the way it is.
Do they still speak Indigenous languages?
Yes.
And
some First Nations don't.
And is health Indigenous? Is healthcare Indigenous? Indigenously sensitive?
I would say no. And I have to say no in Nunavut. It's very, very westernized. Very, very westernized. Because I asked that question when I was there, because I noticed that their cultures and traditions are very different. They do a lot of outdoor. So they do a lot of hunting. They do a lot of digging clams. They eat seaweed. They do a lot of that kind of stuff. Because there's no trees really in Nunavut. It's all rock and it's all turf.
Mm.
First Nations are a little bit different. They do have traditional healing, um, which is being incorporated either in their community separate from the health center and the hospitals. But
Hmm.
I've seen some communities where they actually have combined. So there'd be a health center, and within that health center, there'd be a traditional healing piece of it. But there
Yep.
again,
Yep.
you have to have the doctors talking to the patients about if they want that, right? Would they like to
Yeah.
do
Yep.
traditional healing? Um, and then kind of refer and get them set up with that. Uh, and that kind of
Yeah. Which is
doesn't happen.
complex in its own way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And especially the fact that there's so much legal pressure on it has to be, you're kind of protected when it legally from Western medicine or when you're practicing Western medicine. Whereas if you do an alternate medicine like even Chinese medicine, but obviously indigenous medicine in this case, if you get it wrong or there's a bad outcome, then shit can get complicated.
Well, I think, what I think is we need to stop the westernized way we look at health and medicine and healing needs to be not the main not the main source, right? Because our systems are breaking down, right? We need to start telling people you need to look after yourself, right? And it's a balance. So, the way Indigenous people look at it, your body, your mind, your spirit, and your world around you. So your where you're living all has to be within balance. If something's out of balance, then you're not going to be well, right? And that's true for a lot of Indigenous people right now because they've been out of balance for generations. And trying to find that balance. So there's a lot of Indigenous people that are moving towards traditional healing and connecting with their culture, because a lot of First Nations communities did not keep their language. So when the residential
Yeah.
schools came, right, they weren't allowed to speak their native language. So they kind of lost all of that. And they were scared to speak it because they always got punished for it in residential schools. So that kind of did not travel down to generation to generation to generation. Like my grandparents spoke English. So my mother and aunts and uncles, they all spoke English. They never spoke Mohawk. Um, and I remember my
Yeah.
grandmother teaching me, you know, numbers in Mohawk, just, little pieces like that. But then it was never consistent enough. Right. And she never
Yeah.
ever spoke it around the house. It was kind of all like, you know, when my grandfather wasn't around type of thing. Right. Um,
Yeah.
so Six Nations, really, they lost their language. They're starting to bring it back now, but they lost their language there. And mainly everybody speaks English on that reserve. But again,
Yeah.
they're bringing it back. But Nunavut, everybody speaks their native. They're bilingual there. They speak both English and their native language. And in, Northern Ontario, a lot of those communities, they were bilingual as well. They spoke both Cree and English, and Northwestern Ontario too. A lot. The more remote the community, the more they kept their language.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. It's did you pick up some language through the years out there?
Yes, I actually was picking up a little bit of Cree. I could understand them a lot better than actually speaking it, but I did learn. And I kind of surprised them at times because, I'd be in my office and they'd think I wasn't listening and they're kind of chitter chattering at the desk there. And the one time they were talking about me, and I forget what the topic was, but I knew they were talking about me. And I kind of yelled at them because my door was open to my office. And I kind of yelled at them and said, "Hey, I know what you guys are talking about me." And they all stopped, and then they started laughing because they didn't think that I was able to understand them.
Yeah, you could have held that one in your back
Yes.
pocket. So, did you? So, I want to go down the mental health route. Did you have any issues, any jobs that sort of affected you, or injuries through your career?
No, no physical injuries. I did mention my last job that I had with the government of Nunavut, the organization. That took a toll mental health wise on me, what I experienced there in the office, and just the lack of support that I received from management and HR. I have to say, HR was terrible. I received no support whatsoever, and that kind of pushed me out the door. That really made me think. Once it
Yep.
started becoming more physical as well as mental, it was taking a toll on my physical health. I thought I'm not going to do this because I've been healthy my whole life. And what I experienced there was very, very traumatizing. And it took me a while. It took me a while to I to kind of get over the real sting of it. But I still, to this day, uh, I still think about it, and it still affects me, but just not as acutely as it did when I first left. Because it was like
Yep.
it was pretty much 2 years of harassment and bullying, and making me think, uh, you know, that I was doing something wrong when I had no idea, and I really didn't think I was doing anything, type of thing.
Yep.
So I'd have to say
Have you heard of the term moral injury at all?
moral. No.
Moral injury. I think it's something that you should have a look at. It to me, it was a light bulb moment when I'd heard of it, and it's essentially where there's such a disconnect between and a betrayal between how you're treated, or with a situation that goes so against what your moral compass, that it has that effect on you. And it sounds pretty, it sounds kind of like what you're talking about, that it just, and it leaves physical
Yeah.
scars.
Yeah. 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 No, I'll take a look at that for sure. Yeah. I've never heard of that. But yeah, you're right. Because, you know, I've always upheld, giving quality care and being objective, right? Not getting into, because I hear nurses all the time, oh, they always come in and, oh, they're a drinker and, oh, this. Well, you let that get into your head and you start treating those patients differently, your assessments for those patients go down the drain and you miss things. And there have been
Yep.
incidents where patients have been harmed so badly because they've been missed either by a doctor or by a nurse or by another practitioner when it didn't need to happen at all,
Absolutely.
right? So I
Yeah,
always,
that's how I knew I was. How I knew I wasn't okay, is because I pride myself on my professionalism, where it doesn't matter whether you have you might be disgusted by your patient and what they've done, but you can still treat them as a patient, and overcome all your personal stuff. Uh, in the last days leading up to when I sort of self excluded from work, I wasn't able to do that, and I could recognize that patients were making me angry. My care wasn't up to scratch, and I knew it. Oh, after the fact, I'm like, no. And I remember after the last job, ringing my manager, driving back. I didn't transport this particular person, and I was driving back to the station, and I rang my manager in tears, and I said, I'm not okay. I need to not be here because I'm going to cause
yeah,
harm. And by that, it wasn't meaning I'm going to deliberately hurt someone, or that, but I'm not doing my job to the best of my ability, which means they're not getting the best
Yeah.
care.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And, just everything within that organization uh, went against my moral compass. There was racism. They, I mean, it was just everywhere I looked. It's just something. And, when you try to break down barriers and you're knocking your head against a wall, that's what it was like. It was emotional exhaustion, just trying to get somewhere, and somebody's always blocking you. And I had a manager that was so unsupportive. Um, and I don't even think she knew how to break down the barriers herself, because she'd been in the
Yeah.
organization for 25 plus years. So I'm sure she was so ingrained in everything that was happening, and it wasn't okay with me. Right.
Yeah.
It was just such a closed off organization, in their own little bubble, and they allowed people to mistreat their colleagues, their patients, everything. And I was so offended by it that I just couldn't take it anymore. And then, when it started happening to me, I just thought, you know what? I have to be out because, 5 years I could have had a pension from them, but I thought I can't last another 2 years. And my
No.
health is not
What's
worth
the
it.
damage? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what do you do nowadays, and what's the plan moving forward?
Well, I am building a business as a nursing advocate and a nursing speaker. And right now I talk to nursing leaders about retention and kind of give them some tips on how they can keep nurses. Very simple things that they can do to keep their staff, as well as, talk about the myths around why nurses leave, right? Because nurses don't leave the
Hmm.
profession, they're driven out, right? They're driven out. I
Yeah.
was driven out.
They
And
don't leave their jobs, they leave their managers.
exactly. And they don't stay for money. It's not a money thing, right? That's one of the myths. Is, people always say, "Oh, nurses always, they're just staying in the job for money." Well, it's not money. They're leaving for other reasons, right? And what it really
Yeah.
boils down to is what we've been talking about is the workplace and the culture, right? And just being respected and recognized and not being made to feel that they can be easily replaced, because they can't. You can't put one nurse into the same positions in different units and expect them to give quality care, because it doesn't work. It doesn't work
Yeah.
that way. Right?
Medicine is so much about
Yes.
experience.
Yes. Yes, and what they're good at, right? Because some nurses are good at different things, right? And when you have a team and you bring a team together, and that's what I used to always kind of highlight, this person is good with that. This person's, and we're a team, and we all contribute in different ways to that team to make
Yeah.
it a well running team which gives quality care. I did an experiment when I was in Saskatchewan, Northern Ontario. um, I got the whole team together, and the health center was running very haphazardly, not giving good care at all. The community was very distrustful of the nurses. We started on track, started doing programming, family practice programming, diabetes day, make appointments for people to come in, do all the different, family practice programs, chronic disease, all of that. Got that up and running, got the whole team on board. That community was turned around and started coming to their appointments in 1 year, right? And we set up a triage in the health center so that we could easily get to the patients that needed it the most. And we had people from the community coming in and asking for specific nurses because we built that communication and that bond. It was like amazing. It was just amazing. And I learned
Yeah.
that my triage formula that I had set up there is still working. They're still doing it in that same community. So that was awesome.
Yeah.
When I learned that, I came across a nurse that had worked
Yeah.
in Saskatchewan, and she told me. I was like, "Oh my god!" So it's nice, it's nice to leave something behind, and nice to know that you uh, had some role in changing something, and that it stuck, right? So it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, so you've identified one of those things of moral injury that I was talking about. One of the pillars of moral injury is actually advocacy. Advocacy is one of the pillars that it is common amongst everyone who experiences moral injury. So to hear you say that's the path you're going down, it's definitely the path I've gone down, because it's about, you don't want other people to go through the same shit you've gone through when it's so preventable.
Well, yes, exactly, exactly. And it would, you know, nurses that leave don't really want to leave, right? Again, they were driven out. They were driven out because they just couldn't take it anymore. Um, and I have to
Yeah,
just, I think my role now is, as I said, talking to these nursing leaders and helping them with their retention challenges and showing them just how easy it is. Because nurses aren't asking for a whole lot, right? It's so
mm,
easy as a nursing leader to do just a few easy things. And it's something they could, leave my talk with and go into their workplace and start the next day. It's so very little
yeah,
and so very easy to do. And it's something that their staff would truly appreciate. Because nurses are very forgiving. Um, and they'll forget everything as long as you start appreciating them and recognizing their efforts, right? And making the workplace a little bit nicer, and changing some of the systems, right? Because your policies have to reflect what's being done on the front line, right? And if they have nice organized system flows that make their job so much easier, then they're going to love it. They're going to love it.
yeah. I think, yeah, as we alluded to very early on in this, buy in, spit it out. Buy-in is
Yes.
everything. If you are dictating something that goes against what people believe, you've got no chance. It's just causing
Yeah.
conflict. If you can explain to them in a way, if there's a change that needs to be made that you can explain that benefits the patient, which is why all these positions ultimately exist, is to benefit the patient, then the buy-in is so much easier.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to have happier staff, right? But yeah,
Yeah.
so I have to say that this was a very great conversation. But it is getting on 8 o'clock here for me. I'm gonna have to go. But this was great. I really, really enjoyed talking with you. So thank you very much for having me on your podcast Beyond the Call.
Thank you for coming on. How do people reach you if they want to get hold of you, or even talk to you about this leadership stuff?
My email address is Crystal, Crystal, Culp, CULP as in Peter, .speaks at gmail.com.
crystalculp.speaks@gmail.com. Thank you for coming on. I really wish you luck and good fortune in your endeavors. I hope you make the changes that as you said, that you would have loved to have seen. Be the change you want it to be. So, yeah. All right. Thank you very much for coming on, folks. If you've got any feedback, please leave comments. Spread the podcast on your social media. It's the best way we get to spread our word, and a bit of this affects everyone in every nation. There's no such thing as a perfect healthcare system. So it's spread the word, and let's open conversations.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Crystal, thanks very much. You have a great
You're
night.
welcome.
And thanks everyone. We'll see you at the next one.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Call. If you like what we're about, please make sure you subscribe, and if you can leave a review, that would be appreciated. If you have feedback or suggestions for future guests, please contact me via my socials. Please share with your networks and help me expand my reach. It's a great privilege for people to share their stories and allow us to go beyond the call.